In the US, what do they say? The pursuit of happiness is the ideal. That's a deeply flawed concept, because when you're pursuing happiness, suffering becomes a barrier on the journey. Instead, pursue meaning, pursue what I call your worthy struggle, pursue your path, pursue the adventure of that path. Then suffering becomes part of the journey, it becomes part of the adventure. It's not a barrier and an impediment, because happiness is not the elimination of sadness. Happiness is the ability to find the gift in sadness. Sadness is not the enemy.
2, 1, 0.
Hi, and welcome to Stellar Life Podcast. This is your host, Orion, and this conversation made my heart race. Actually, I think my heart is still racing because we spoke about things that were quite difficult, like war and trafficking and some traumatic experiences that brought my guest into living on the edge of fear and learning a lot from it. Akshay Nanavati is a Marine Corps veteran, an adventurer, entrepreneur, and author of Fearvana. Since overcoming depression, PTSD, and alcoholism that pushed him to the brink of suicide, he has run ultramarathons, spent 10 days in the darkness, and is currently training for a solo 110 days, 1,700 miles crossing of Antarctica. In this episode, you will learn a lot about war and fear and how to overcome it. It's super exciting and scary at times. But what you're going to really learn is how to master the space between stimulus and response, how to chase your worthy struggle, and how to smile in the face of suffering. And now, without further ado, on to the show. Hi, Akshay, and welcome to Stellar Life Podcast. It's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored.
Yes, thank you so much. Before we begin, can you share your origin story and how did you develop Fearvana?
Sure. Yeah, my journey to Fearvana began, I was born in India and lived in India for 8 years, moved from India to Singapore, and then moved to the US at the age of 13. And very quickly after moving here, I got heavily into drugs, into alcohol. I used to cut myself, burn myself, very self-destructive, lost 2 friends to addiction, was heading down that path myself until one day I saw the movie Black Hawk Down. And I don't know, have you seen that movie?
No.
So it's a war movie based on a true story. And watching that movie, specifically, there's a scene where these two Delta snipers, they volunteer to go on the ground to set up a defensive perimeter to protect the second Black Hawk helicopter that crashed. They had no idea when reinforcements had arrived, knowing that hundreds of armed enemy personnel are heading their way. And both of them still volunteered to go down. And both of them died. But the man they died protecting, Michael Durant, is still alive today because of what they did. They received the Medal of Honor, which is the highest award for valor in the U.S. military, posthumously, because they were killed. And watching that just triggered something in me. I mean, the level of courage, compassion, self-sacrifice to put your life on the line for somebody else like that and to give your life for somebody else. You know, I was living a very selfish, meaningless, purposeless, worthless existence. And so almost overnight after watching that movie, I read the book Black Hawk Down and stopped doing drugs and decided to join the Marines.
Wow.
It took me about 1.5 years to get in because I have a blood disorder that 2 doctors told me would kill me in boot camp.
Wow.
So I had to kind of fight my way to get in. Yeah.
That's amazing. But you overcome it.
I did. Obviously, I not only survived boot camp, I graduated infantry school as the honor graduate, and the Marines laid the foundation for everything I am today. It taught me the beauty of suffering. It taught me the beauty of going to war with yourself, of adversity, of living for something greater than yourself. You know, in the Marines, nobody cares about your well-being. What matters is the men and the mission. So you're living for the good of the group. And while challenging at times, especially when you don't want to go on a mission because you're tired, it's beautiful to live in a world like that. So after joining the Marines, I got into other ways to confront myself, to explore my own fears and the limitlessness of the human potential. So I got into every outdoor sport you can think of. Rock climbing, cave diving, skydiving, you name it, mountain climbing. And then in 2007, I was deployed to Iraq as an infantry Marine, where one of my jobs was to walk in front of our vehicles looking for bombs.
Oof.
Before they could be used to kill me and my fellow Marines.
Oh.
Dangerous job, as you might imagine.
Yes.
But learned to thrive out there. I survived the war, came back, struggled after I came back. I was drinking heavily, was diagnosed with PTSD, battling depression. One morning after 5 days of binge drinking, I woke up and I was seconds away from picking up a knife and slitting my wrists. And that was rock bottom. That's where I began to climb out of the abyss, started delving into neuroscience, psychology, spirituality, doing a lot of inner work and that inner healing work, and found my peace, built up Fearvana. I wrote the book Fearvana to help others navigate their suffering, to navigate navigate their fears. And I found my own peace through outdoor adventures, being an ultramarathon runner, polar explorer, mountain climber, and pushing the edge in some very, very intense places all over the world. I was in Antarctica last year, lost 2 fingers to frostbite.
Oi!
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been on some extreme edges, but I've been very blessed for the wisdom I get to receive by playing on these edges.
Wow, this is crazy. So I know what you're saying about boot camp. I served in the IDF, Israeli Defense Force. I wasn't a warrior, I was intelligence. So I just had information that I was dealing with. The boot camp changed me completely from being just a teenager to actually becoming a more responsible human being. So what do you think it was in you that, because you had the PTSD and you were back into addiction. So what was it that got you out of it?
Once I hit that rock bottom and I started delving into this a little bit more to figure out trauma, to understand it better, I started to learn there's a giant distinction between post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress disorder. So, for example, I was diagnosed with PTSD because I struggled with loud noises. I didn't like being in crowds. I was struggling with survivor's guilt because I lost a close friend of mine in the war. And all of these things I was told were symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. But the fact of the matter is, I spent 7 months in a war zone where loud noises meant death. That's normal to come back hypervigilant to loud noises. That's not a disorder. It's a normal human response to war. We've created a paradigm in our society that trauma equals disorder, and that becomes its own self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, for example, Dr. Martin Seligman, one of the leading researchers in the positive psychology movement, he went into the West Point Military Academy, and he asked the cadets there, how many of you have heard of post-traumatic stress disorder? And something like 95% of people said we've heard of it. He asked them, how many of you have heard of post-traumatic growth? It was less than 5%. So we live in a world now. I mean, take a look at COVID. Even after COVID, or during it, every article was like COVID's causing mental health problems, COVID's causing PTSD. Nowhere do you find the paradigm set that trauma, adversity, struggle makes us better. Nowhere would you see that reality. And so it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy. So what I learned to do is I learned to reframe this. Okay, I have post-traumatic stress, but that doesn't mean it's a disorder. That's not who I am. It's not my identity. There's nothing wrong with me, because when we fall into that self-fulfilling prophecy, when we fall into that self-dialogue, it becomes our identity. Instead, I simply learned to reframe it. For example, my guilt. I struggle with survivor's guilt because I lost a friend in the war. And everybody told me you shouldn't feel guilty, and rationally I get it. War, you can't control what happens. Bullets fly where they fly. Bombs explode where they explode. You can't control it. But emotionally, it didn't change the fact that I had guilt, and my guilt was not a problem. My guilt was an expression of love. It was an expression of love from my brother in arms. So instead of trying to demonize it, instead of trying to frame it as a quote-unquote bad emotion, which it's not, because there are no bad emotions, they're just emotions. There's no, some are more challenging than others, like guilt, but it's not bad. And so for a long time, what I did was I put a picture of my friend that I lost in the war up on my wall, and it said, "This should have been you. Earn this life."
Wow.
My guilt became my ally. It became my fuel to writing this book. To this day, I have a training board right behind me, right on this computer, and it says, "Pay your debt." I believe I owe a debt for this life I've been gifted. When I was in Iraq, my vehicle drove over an active bomb that didn't explode. My friends drove over a bomb that exploded. I don't know why that happened. There is no answer. But to me, I owe a debt for this life. And so that works for me. I've had therapists tell me that's a unhealthy way of thinking. There's something wrong with how I think. But I think that is flawed. We all have darkness. We all have demons. We all have a pain we struggle with. Instead of trying to demonize it, trying to crush it, trying to avoid it, why not use it? Why not turn it into something beautiful? Because everything can be turned into something beautiful if you consciously engage it.
Yeah, wow, I love so many things that you said right there. Because I know in my life, I turned some of my darkest moments into the best outcomes ever. And I would never be the person that I am today without those experiences. And I know what you're saying about self-fulfilling prophecy. For somebody who's listening right now, maybe they're struggling with something. Maybe they are experiencing that prophecy right now. The view of the world that is not for their best and highest good. Like, what is the first step to get out of there if they're hitting rock bottom?
You have to pause to acknowledge and be with the emotion you're experiencing. Because, as I said, we demonize emotions as bad. So I'll give you another example. I was working with this person once. I was on an interview and somebody called in. They had gone through the Boston bombing and they were struggling with post-traumatic stress, which they had been assigned the label post-traumatic stress disorder. Like, she was very jumpy with loud noises. And so as we were helping her, trying to offer some suggestions, I said, the next time you hear that loud noise, I just want you to pause when the anxiety hits. Just kind of sit with the anxiety, be with it. Don't judge it, don't do anything, just be with it. And she goes, that's really hard. I said, yeah, it is hard. But you have to go through the hard thing to get on the other side of it. The fundamental problem with our collective outlook in the human condition is we're looking for the easiest, quickest way out of the pain. That's the problem. You have to move through the pain, be with the pain to get the other side of it. So the first step is actually acknowledging the presence of that emotion. Like, okay, I feel anxious. I feel stress. I feel fear. Neuroscience has even shown that when you label the emotion, it reduces activity in the emotional parts of the brain and increases activity in the part of the brain related to focus and awareness, the prefrontal cortex. So simply by acknowledging this thing is there, but this thing doesn't define my identity. Like most people will say things like, I have post-traumatic stress disorder. I have depression. I am depressed. It becomes their identity. Instead of saying my brain goes through a state of depression from time to time, but that's not who I am. That's not who I have to be. So another example, like Buddha said, we're all stabbed by the two darts of suffering. The first dart is the thing we don't control. Like, I'm jumpy with loud noises. When I came back from war, that was not within my control anymore. My brain learned to create that response. Or survivor's guilt, right? I don't choose that response. It's a response to stimuli. The second dart is the point of power. That's where we go into that self-dialogue. What's wrong with me? We label it disorder. We beat ourselves up for it. Instead of just accepting the isness of things, Like I took a friend rock climbing and she was super nervous and scared. And then after the climb, she was beating herself up like, what's wrong with me? Why am I scared? I shouldn't have been scared. She saw me and I wasn't scared. I wasn't scared because I was any braver. It's the only reason I wasn't scared is because I had done a lot of very, very hard climbing. So my brain had more references to say this experience doesn't warrant fear. In fact, it took courage on her part to make the climb. It took no courage on my part to make the climb. So the first dart is that thing we don't control. It's the emotion. It's the stimuli. The second dart is our point of power. So you have to master that space. Instead of reacting to the emotion, respond to it. To respond to it, you have to pause and first acknowledge that it's there and then master that space between the emotion and who you choose to be outside of it. But that takes dealing with the emotion. It takes being still. So stillness is one of the core things, like reflecting on it, journaling on it, getting a coach, getting a therapist, some way to be with it fully, and then you can reframe it into something beautiful, into something purposeful. But you have to acknowledge its presence. You have to sit with the darkness, sit with the demons, sit with that struggle in order to then turn it into something valuable. Because as Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So you have to make that unconscious conscious.
What was the scariest thing you've seen in Iraq?
When I went in 2007, it was closer towards the end of the war. So we weren't getting we had pop shots being fired at us all the time. Our greatest threat were IEDs, but we weren't in the middle of Fallujah or in World War II battles like that, or just rounds going off all the time. But we were dealing with death a lot. The first week we got there, the insurgents cut the head off a local Iraqi and threw it on the streets.
Oh.
Because it was a threat to the Iraqi people. If you work with the Americans, this is what will happen. It had the reverse effect. They actually wanted to work with us to stop the insurgents from doing that. Forget about what we endured. What the Iraqi people were enduring was far worse. They had lived under oppressive regimes, under hell. I met a gentleman out there who had spent 8 years as a prisoner of war in Iran because of the Iran-Iraq war that Saddam Hussein started. Now, granted, again, we shouldn't have gone in. There was a lot of politics, a lot of lies. I'm not saying no. But on the ground, we genuinely wanted to help the people. And those people had endured immense amounts of hell. We had a guy get killed right outside our base. They shot a rocket right outside our base. I'm assuming they were trying to hit us, but they killed 4 civilians in the town right in front of us, So that kind of thing was happening all the time. And it was just because being a counterinsurgency warfare environment, it's challenging because you're going through normal towns. With most people out there, just normal people trying to live their life. But as Marines, you never know, is that person just a normal person trying to live their life, or is that person the one who wants to kill you and your buddies?
That's the problem in Israel too, because, everybody wants peace. It's just that you don't know who's who. It's very hard to distinguish. War sucks on both ends, because at the end of the day, we're all humans. Like, children are children and people are people, and it's so difficult. Do you still have memories, or did you resolve all of them? What was your process of dealing with this pain?
It's still very much present, and I've learned to use it. To this day, I'll sometimes watch scenes from war movies knowing they will make me cry, knowing they'll put me in a very intense state, but I consciously go there because there's value in engaging the intensity of that emotion. Like, when you tap into your darkness, when you live on the frontiers of life and death, it amplifies the intensity and volume in which you live your life. Because if you want to know pleasure, you have to know pain. If you want to experience a summit, there has to be a valley. So we try to demonize that one side. The pain is bad and the demons are bad. The darkness is bad. But you cannot really know the light unless you've been first in the dark. So to this day, I very consciously tap into that space because it amplifies the gratitude and the gratefulness and the experience of life in the other places. And I even value the intensity of it. Like when I'm watching a scene from a war movie tearing up, I value value the intensity of that experience. It's a beautiful experience to go through that emotion. I still feel the guilt around like I said, there's literally a sign up on my wall that says pay your debts. I was born to great parents. They weren't extremely wealthy at the time, but they certainly weren't poor. They were middle class. Now they're doing much better. My dad's worked hard for that. And but I look at my life, and I've worked in post-conflict zones. I've worked with survivors of sex trafficking. I've worked with former child soldiers. I've volunteered in leper colonies. I've worked with people in poverty.
My goodness, wow, you've done a lot.
Yeah, it's been an intense journey, but I'm very blessed to have seen a lot of the human experience and the human condition within and without, right? But by seeing it, you experience it, and I see most people are born into hell on earth. Simply by being born where I was born to good parents, as a result, I've blessed with a lifetime more opportunities than many on earth. And I didn't do shit to earn that. So for me, I owe a debt for this life. And that's, again, like some people think of it as an unhealthy way of looking, and that people tell me that, but that works for me. That drives me. It amplifies me. It fuels me, So that pain of the war, the guilt that I have that I didn't suffer enough, that others died and I didn't get shot. I didn't lose any limbs. I get to come back alive. But it's not like I'm living miserable. Like I could not be happier. I love my life. I'm very, very, very happy. I'm very blessed. But those two forces can coexist. The guilt around this life and the gratitude for this life, they can coexist as one. Like as a very concrete example, I spent 10 days in complete darkness and isolation. And that was the second time. First time I did for 7 days, and then 10 days sitting in a dark room, like so dark you cannot see your hand in front of you darkness. And I remember when I came out of the darkness and those first few moments when I first saw the light, I was so moved. I was like tears rolling down my face. And I remember thinking this deep sense of gratitude for every bit of pain I experienced in my life ever, because I realized in a very visceral, very profound way that you cannot truly know the power, the luminosity of the light unless you have first been in the dark. I only got to see the world through those eyes for those few moments because I had spent 7 days or 10 days in darkness. And so I value that. That's why I still to this day value the darkness of whatever experiences I've navigated in war and since then.
So when I was in the army, I knew a girl that she got into the army jail and they put her as punishment in a little room, a dark room for I think 24 hours or 36 hours. And she, like, it drove her nuts. This was like I think the highest form of punishment or something like that. But like, why would you do that? Why would you take yourself into this? And first of all, how do you find about it? Where is it? And what is it like?
Are you familiar with Vipassanas, the silent retreats?
Yes, silent meditation for 7-10 days.
Exactly. Those are much more common. I didn't know a thing like a darkness retreat even existed. I found this silent retreat. I was going to go there. The initial draw even was I wanted to experience stillness. I had done a lot of hard things in my life, pushing through ultramarathons, this was all after the war, navigating all that stuff, my demons, the PTSD, but I wanted to go deeper within. And the initial draw for that was I went through a very challenging divorce. And when I divorced, I broke my sobriety. I broke it hard, like drinking a liter of vodka a day. And so something was clearly missing within. I wanted to go deeper. So I was going to go to a silent retreat, but while researching, I stumbled into this concept of a darkness retreat. And I was far more appealing to me because when you're in darkness, you shut off one of the primary ways in which we engage with reality, our visual sense. So even in the most simplest way, like I can look at that wall and say that's a wall, that's a window, but I have somewhere external for consciousness to attach onto. In the darkness, you have nowhere external for consciousness to attach onto. So you're forced to go within. And when you go within, you're opening doors within your soul that have rarely, if ever, been opened before. And the beauty in that is it's challenging because you don't know what's coming out of those doors. You're going to find not just the sunshine and rainbows and unicorns, you're going to find your darkest demons. But when it all comes out, as I was saying earlier, until you make the unconscious conscious, it'll direct your life and you will call it fate, as Carl Jung said. So I wanted to go within to see what I would find, to see what was to go deeper within myself. And not just myself, but within the human soul, within the human spirit, and tap into some new insights and some new awakenings and see what would be revealed to me in that. That's why I went back the second time. First time I did it for 7 days. Second time I did it for 10 days, because it's a profoundly beautiful experience. I could not recommend it enough for anybody.
So what is it like? You go in and you meet somebody, like take me through it. What is it like to go into this endeavor?
Yeah, you're sitting in a fairly small room. It's, literally dark that you cannot see your hand in front of you in darkness.
How many people are involved?
You're alone. You're in an isolated room, fairly small. There's a bed, a meditation couch.
They just give you the keys and you lock yourself?
No, so the first time I did it was in Germany and the second time was in Mexico. You have to go to a place where this is set up because some people are like, could I just do it in the house? But you want no ambient light. You want it to be complete darkness. So it actually, logistically, it takes a bit to set up a room like that. So the second time was in Mexico. I did it at a darkness retreat center where they do this. And I went in a day early. You get a feel for the room. You spend a day getting out of the chaos of the real life before you transition into the complete stillness of the darkness. And then you go in, you lock the door. I mean, the door's not locked. You're not locked from the outside. You can get out anytime you want. You know what I mean? You're not trapped in there. The door is open. So if you choose to, you can leave early. And then twice a day, like I chose to do a juice fast. You can choose to do food, but I wanted to add hunger to the experience.
Of course you did.
Of course I did. Yeah, why not? As one does.
Some torture.
Exactly. Go a little deeper into the pain cave, So I chose to do, when I did the 10 days, I did 8 days of a juice fast. And the last 2 days, I had no calories at all, just a pure water fast. And you start seeing lights in the darkness. Like, for example, the brightest white light I've ever seen in my entire life was sitting in a dark room. It was so bright, I was getting blinded. I was literally trying to shield my eyes, covering my eyes. I was touching my eyelids because I couldn't tell if they were open or closed. And I was sitting in a completely dark room.
So that light, do you think it was like a spirit, God, or your brain playing tricks on you?
Great question. I think there's multiple ways to experience it. Some, like what they say is neurologically, your brain starts to release DMT.
Okay.
Which is one of the primary ingredients in ayahuasca. So you experience these hallucinogenic type journeys that you go on.
You can release DMT through breath work as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So you're very well familiar with it. So you totally can. So in the darkness, you start seeing that. And the lights are as real as anything else. So on the one hand, there's a neurological explanation for it. But I also believe the shapes that take place in the lights, because in the lights, you'll see different shapes forming often. And to me, it's God speaking to me through these shapes and hearing messages.
Through sacred geometry.
Exactly. Sacred geometry, however one chooses to view it too. But like there's everybody. I mean, I've had a friend who's done the darkness retreat. He saw his own shapes, whatever messages he needed to hear, whatever God speak to him. For me, I had a conversation with God that left me bawling in tears.
Oh, wow.
It was beautiful.
What did God tell you?
It was day 5 in the darkness when I did this 10-day darkness journey. And I was day 5 and I couldn't sleep, because what happens is when you try to sleep, you'll see a flashing white light in their corner. And it's very, very hard to sleep because even if your eyes are closed, the light is still there, So it's this flashing light. So I was getting kind of frustrated. I couldn't fall asleep. And so I just sat up on my bed and said, all right, God, I surrender. Just do with me what you please. And I don't remember how it started, but the first memory I have of it, and in the lights, I saw this arrow starting to point up, and I heard this voice say, "Follow me." And I said, "Where? What are you trying to show me?" And it said, "Don't worry, just follow." And as this arrow started pointing, I started seeing in front of me this white cylindrical shape. And I said, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to see. And it said, "Look deeper, look harder." And then this ray of light started kind of extending to my top right behind me. I was moving my head, and I looked up and I saw a ball of light, and above it was a black, like there was depth to the darkness, almost as if looking at a night sky, like looking into the universe, right?
Like looking into a black hole.
Yeah, like just there was depth to the darkness. There was this like it's a whole universe was above me, right? And I'm looking at this thing, and I hear this voice say, "I am everywhere." And then this ball of light exploded into green light crystals that had started falling in front of me, like bright green light crystals. And it said, "I am life, I am in everything." And then once it fell in front of me, it said, it like kind of dissipated in front of me. My head started turning to the front. I was looking at it, and I vividly remember this. And it said, "I am with you, now go." And as soon as I heard that, I kind of awoken from this stupor, if you will, and I just started bawling. I don't know why, I just started bawling and crying and crying and crying and crying. And I started thinking about my life. I think about all these times where I should have died and I didn't, multiple times faced death. I was thinking about my friend that died in the war. I was thinking about these people I've seen in post-conflict zones. And why do I get this life, right? Like even as we're sitting here having this conversation, there are people in hell on earth right now. There's people in war zones. There are people being trafficked, slaves, just the horrific nature of human evil that people are dealing with. And I was thinking about all this, and I was like, why do I get this? And I was asking God, and God said, "You know why?" And I said, "I don't, like I feel so grateful for it, but I also feel guilty for it." And then the response was, "That's why." And I just started bawling again. I'm not saying everybody has to think this way, that my paradigm is mine alone. Everybody can find their own way to approach this. But for me, it was like the pain I feel, the guilt I felt around my life about losing my friends, the fact that I believe I owe a debt for this life. It's like my mom's always said as a young age, you have a hotline with God. And the amount of times I should have died and I didn't in life. It's like I've been blessed with the great life, and the price I pay for that is the suffering I seek, the suffering I've experienced, to bring the wisdom back. By going into these edges of suffering that now I voluntarily seek out, you cannot open certain doors without going into the depths of suffering and solitude that I go into. You have to battle the dragon to find the treasure, and the greater the dragon, the greater the treasure. So I pay off the debt for this life by going into the depths of suffering, into the depths of solitude, and bringing the wisdom back from the edge to help others navigate their own version of a storm, their own version of darkness. And so to me, that it like crystallized a lot about my life that God told me that this is why, you get a good life, but there's a debt you owe for it. And it brought a lot of clarity to my life. It made a lot of things that made sense after that. And it was just like I said, it left me bawling in tears. It was really beautiful.
Yeah, it sounds like a very healing moment, a beautiful moment, a moment of oneness.
It was incredible. I was journaling in the dark as well. So after that, I started journaling because I would like just have a ruler and journaling. And even the stuff that came through my darkness journal, a lot of it when I read it later, I don't remember writing, but I would read it and be moved to tears like, holy shit, this is wild. Like, it's amazing. Some of the stuff that just kind of was channeled through the darkness, through God, the universe.
Are you ever gonna publish some of those writings?
I've shared the journal from the first darkness retreat. I haven't publicly shared from the second one. It's some of it's a little out there, and and not that I'm like hiding it, but it's like, unless you know me, it's gonna come. I just don't want to delve into the unnecessary dialogue that will come from it. I'm happy to share. I share it with people, I haven't shared it too publicly, even with people who know me, just for whatever reason, but it's beautiful. I mean, eventually I've thought about potentially going into the darkness for like a good 20 days and writing a book, but who knows? We'll cross that bridge next.
Oh my goodness, that's gonna be insane. Well, if you can't post what you posted on the second darkness retreat, you won't be able to post on the third one after 20 days. No way, unless you're ready.
Especially after I get more life experiences, after I go 100, because I'm about to, like, what I'm currently training for is to be 110 days completely alone in Antarctica, dragging a 400-pound sled for 1,700 miles.
After you lost your fingers?
I've lost 2 fingers to frostbite.
How do you even deal with that?
I went to Antarctica as a training expedition for this expedition. So losing the fingers it was like, all right, whatever, deal with it and move. I was always going to go back. I mean, even when I was being evacuated, I was planning my return to Antarctica. And people have called me stupid, crazy. A bunch of people are like, what's wrong with you? Why would you go back? But to me, losing a tip of a finger is a very, 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 very small price to pay for the rewards and the treasures you get to unearth in that. Like, only in silence can you really start to hear. You hear the things you don't get to hear in the distraction of the world. And in that, the voice of God, the treasures I get to unearth. I mean, losing the tip of a finger is a small price to pay. I would lose another one if I mean, I hope I don't, but but if I had to, I wouldn't be bothered.
No, please don't.
Yeah, I definitely hope I don't. But I mean, this finger, the finger on my left middle finger, it actually recovered fully from the frostbite. This one on the right ring finger, this one was black and it had to go. This finger recovered fully and it was a normal finger. I prophylactically had it removed. I had a good finger cut off because once you get frostbite, you're always more prone to getting frostbite. So when I was out in the Arctic just a few weeks ago on a series of expeditions, it got so cold, like it was minus 37 degrees, this finger was giving me more problems. So I decided it was a liability and I cut it off. Now, even the doctor, like 3 doctors, they didn't want to cut it off because they were like, it's a good finger. We can't ethically cut it off. And they were talking to me. They're like, you shouldn't do this. It's a good finger. And I was explaining to the doctor, I was like, doctor, the mission that I get to go, this journey into the human soul, that journey is way more important to me than a tip of a finger. I'm not the tip of my finger. Functionally, it's barely noticeable. So who cares? I get to go into the depths of the human soul that are very, very, very rarely accessed. And that's a privilege. It's a privilege I'm grateful for.
It sounds really extreme to me.
Believe me, I get called everything you can possibly imagine, but it's not coming from a lack of awareness. I've tasted the rewards from going into these worlds already, and there's a reason I keep going back.
What was it like being in Antarctica? What is it like there?
It's one of the most hostile, unforgiving environments on the planet, right? Like, temperatures can drop to minus 40, hurricane force winds, unforgiving, savage winds, barren white nothingness. Most of Antarctica has no life. There's penguins in one corner of Antarctica. Most of it has 0 life. But it is such a privilege to experience that land. I mean, in this barren isolation. I remember when I landed in Antarctica, I was looking out at the plane window and I was like, I'm in Antarctica. Well, the words that automatically came out of me without even thinking it was, I'm home. The privilege of it, like, it's a land so unforgiving to life. That's why there's literally no life out there. It's so unforgiving to human life, especially. But to me, that becomes a mirror to the soul. Because out there in that, like, when Antarctica is hostile, it's not acting out of malice. There's no intent to its hostility. It just is. And so the pure isness of that environment acts like a profound mirror to the human soul, to yourself. It truly is a privilege. I could not feel more grateful that I get to go into that land. As challenging as it is, and it is challenging, it's one of the most, like, polar travel is the most, out of all the sports I've done, like ultramarathons, I've climbed mountains. It's not as dangerous as climbing mountains, but it's a lot more suffering, a lot more mental and physical suffering. And that to me is the draw.
I've never been to such hard conditions ever in my life. I mean, I've done things in my life in seminars, like walking on glass or walking on coals and breaking an arrow with your neck, like things like that. But it seems so small compared to doing the things that you are doing. But it does something to your brain when you're doing the impossible. Like it's something changes in you when you do something that you thought was never possible, like fear of fire, fear of getting cut with shards of glass. I mean, it does something to you. But do you think we need to keep reinforcing that and go through more suffering in order to get some form of enlightenment?
I do believe so. Some might have the great question. I've had these conversations with my friends. Some may disagree, but I think, every time I've often been asked, what's the toughest thing you've done? What's the greatest lesson? Every time I go into these spaces, there's a new awakening that I've been gifted. I don't believe enlightenment is a destination. I believe it is a momentary experience because until death, there's always more to experience. There's always more for journey. There's always more growth to be had until the day you die, So until that day comes, there's always something more out there waiting for you. And we're all trapped within our own lens of reality because we don't know what we don't know, right? So to enter those realms of what we don't know, to go into new worlds, both within and without, you have to keep exploring and to explore somewhere. Like if you want more of life, if you want to go somewhere you've never been before, to experience something you've never experienced before, you have to push yourself. Like you have to enter into new terrain or your life is just going to keep staying the same. And so when you enter into new terrain, both on the journey within or exploring, new worlds externally, inevitably it's going to be hard because you've never been there before. So that's the value though, to go and, to what degree, to each their own. I'm not saying like crossing Antarctica is the only means to access enlightenment, right? Everybody has their own thing. Like you said, it's not about doing what I do. It's about finding your edge. That's what we want to do. When I went through these stories we tell, I want to inspire people to find their own edge. Like find your own edge, push that own edge one step, and you'll keep discovering something new. But as you do, it's not about just going through like the spaces of suffering. I'm also very, very playful, right? Like I play on all edges. So if you look at the duality of like suffering and play, I'm going into the spaces of suffering, but I'm also very, very playful. They're always laughing, always experiencing life. Like I want to experience the range of the human condition in all its forms. And I want to live life at a volume dialed by 11, right? Like I want my volume of life dialed to the highest intensity. And to do that, you have to play on all edges of pain and pleasure, of light and dark, of all the dualities in the human condition, of play on all of them. Go into suffering, play, fear, nirvana, experience it all, and life gets dialed up. And ultimately, isn't that what we're seeking? The rapture of being alive, the bliss of life at its highest level?
The rapture of being alive. It's so exciting. That's awesome. Well, let me share, the most physical thing I've done when I was younger, I did the Tough Mudder. Have you heard of it? It's a 30-mile obstacle course, and you climb walls and you go through obstacles like the Chernobyl jacuzzi where it's just like ice water, and it was very, very cold. I did it in New Jersey, super cold outside. We all were suffering from hypothermia at the end. Like my whole team was like, we got our beer and our ribbon and we're holding the beer and the ribbon and we're all shaking. We couldn't even smile. Quite funny. But yeah, it does something to you, those things. So, but it seems like you need to cement the neurology of courage in your mind over and over again until it become a clear pathway, because it fades after a while. Isn't it true?
100%. If you don't practice and train that muscle, it does fade.
What is happening in your brain when you do those things?
The more you train it, the more you can deal with it however it shows up. Like, for example, I'm more scared of going on a date than I am of all the insane things that I do. Like, I just started dating this woman, and like, we went on a date the other day, like it was like our second date. I was more nervous doing that than I was like going to Antarctica. I kid you not. Butterflies in my stomach, anxiety, nerves. But point is to say, like, I don't care when the fear shows up anymore. I'm comfortable facing it. So it's not always going into the edge of Antarctica. Going on a date was really scary, but you go into it, and now we're dating and it's something beautiful. So it's about just dealing with it, finding it in all areas of life, and then just playing on that edges. Like the more you train that muscle, it doesn't have to be just doing these extreme things. It'll show up in normal life all the time, but you develop a comfort with it. Like I don't care when it shows up. I don't care how it shows up. Let it show up. I'll be with it and I'll move through it. That's the value.
I like the whole idea of light and darkness, because it seems like the world, it's like people get offended when you disagree with their opinion and they are so hurt. It's almost like they are detached from reality. Because if they had to go through like 0.5 of the suffering, the physical suffering or the mental suffering that you've been through, they would be different. It seems like we are raising a softer generation. What do you think about that?
I do. I mean, I agree. I think it's kind of twofold. On the one hand, yes, we are. On the other hand, the environment is cultivating more softness. Like, I empathize with kids today. They're growing up in a tougher environment than you and me grew up in. I mean, I think we're the last generation to remember what life was like without internet, you know? We didn't have dopamine machines all over around us when we grew up. So I think on the one hand, I empathize that the environment is more challenging to grow up in because this environment is not conducive to mental well-being. And you could not reasonably argue that. Like, look at the malaise in society, you know? So I think on the one hand, it's just more challenging for parents to raise kids today. It's more challenging for kids to grow up in this environment today because a kid is just receiving, you know, stimuli from their environment. Is it their fault that they grow up? You know, not, no. Like the environment's really, really hard. On the other hand, parents got to teach their kids how to suffer. One of the biggest mistakes I see parents make when I speak at events or work with people in coaching is overprotecting their kids. You have to let your kids suffer. You know, you get confident by doing hard things and then rising above that, you know? So trying to look for a world that feeds into this notion of instant gratification, looking for the easiest way out. We live in a world also that says, I mean, in the US, what do they say? The pursuit of happiness is the ideal. That's a deeply flawed concept because when you're pursuing happiness, suffering becomes a barrier on the journey. Instead, pursue meaning, pursue what I call your worthy struggle, pursue your path, pursue the adventure of that path. Then suffering becomes part of the journey. It becomes part of the adventure. It's not a barrier and an impediment because happiness is not the elimination of sadness. Happiness is the ability to find the gift in sadness. Sadness is not the enemy. I want to experience sadness. You cannot know true happiness without sadness, you know? So that's the problem, is the way we approach trauma, the way we approach pain, the way we approach sadness. We even deem it as quote unquote negative emotions. But there are no negative emotions. There's no bad emotions. There's no good emotions. There's just emotions. There's just experiences. And it's entirely up to us to decide what we do with them. But this whole idea that I'll be happy when I get there, when I get the $1 million, when I get the car, when I get the relationship. We live in that world, right? I'll be happy when I get whatever the there is. And as a result, we don't fall in love with the process of overcoming problems, overcoming struggle on the journey to getting there. The getting there is a side effect of actually falling in love with the pursuit. It's good to have goals. It's good to have targets. But once you have that target, set it in the back of your mind and focus on the journey. Like, who have become even training for this expedition across Antarctica is magnificent. Like, I love the journey.
Yes.
Whether or not I make this crossing, it's been amazing even preparing for it.
Wow. So what does letting your kids suffer look like?
Sports is a good way to help them suffer, help them learn how to suffer, help them learn how to fall. You know, putting them in martial arts, putting them in sports, sending them into dark rooms.
I love martial arts. I used to do it.
Yeah, like go through physical hardship and also allowing them to feel their emotions. Like, another big mistake I see parents make is they'll say things like, don't be scared, don't worry, don't stress out, don't be anxious, don't be nervous. And you're always telling kids not to feel what you feel instead of like allowing them to feel it fully. All right, you're feeling scared. Let's talk about it. Explain it. Understand it. Like, let them feel the quote unquote negative emotions. When I use it in quotes, but really what they are, the challenging emotions, they're not negative. Let them experience it. Let them acknowledge it. Talk to them about it. But if you demonize it, all you're teaching them is like to run away from it. Like, especially with young men. Young men will always be like, I'm not scared of anything. And it becomes this false bravado that is actually even more destructive. And believe me, I know it all too well in the Marines, right? You were in the military, you get it, right? I'm not scared of anything. But like in war, anybody who's not scared is either lying to you or they're absolutely insane. Fear is an incredibly valuable emotion, you know? So this kind of bravado that having fear means you're weak is deeply flawed. I'm scared of everything I do. Like, you can't have courage without fear. So allowing them to feel their emotions, allowing them to experience it, teaching them these different self-fulfilling prophecies that there's value in pain, there's value in adversity, helping them think through it. Like, one of my friends, I was working with her and I started encouraging her to talk to her kids every night now. She asks her kid, how did you struggle today? And what'd you learn from it? You know? So you're teaching them to develop a positive relationship to struggle.
Oh, I like that. Because I was listening to you and I'm like, how can I implement that? Like, what does it mean to talk to him about fear? It's like, you have fear. Great. Fear is good. Like, I like that framing. What did you struggle with and what did you learn from it? It's cool.
Teach them to to develop a positive relationship, that fear is not bad, anxiety is not bad, stress is not bad. It's that what they do with it. It's the second dart, right? As we were talking about. So they have to practice being with that emotion to master the space. Viktor Frankl once said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And the stimulus is not just an external stimulus. The stimulus is that internal emotion, most of which we don't control. Like, if somebody comes into this room with a gun, my brain will react with fear. I'm not choosing it. It will respond with fear because it sees a threat. That's the stimulus. It's not just like, don't get caught up in is the first dart, the guy with the gun, is it my fear? The second dart, the point of power, is recognizing it's there. Now what do I do with it? That is the space between reacting to an emotion or responding to an emotion. And those are two very different things, you know? So let them be with it, let them feel it, and let them find value in struggle. And if they shift their paradigm to view it that way, then, I mean, how can you not find more bliss in the human experience when you know how to smile in the face of suffering? Because it won't matter whether life punches you in the face or whether you're seeking out a worthy challenge, you'll be able to smile through all the suffering.
Yeah. Because life will.
It certainly will. Exactly. It certainly will.
I can try to protect my son as much as I can, but eventually, like, he's gonna have his own journey. He needs to know how to handle it. I love the idea of again, what you said. What did you struggle with, and what did you learn from it? Have you seen the movie Stutz on Netflix? It's called Stutz. It's with Jonah Hill.
No, I don't think I have.
So Jonah Hill is a comedian actor, and he's interviewing his psychologist. And he wrote the book The Tools, and it's an incredible movie. I just saw it yesterday. Incredible. And a lot of the principles in that movie are very much aligned with everything you told me today, with how to deal with things. I mean, one of the tools of how to deal with fear is imagining fear as a black cloud, whatever you're afraid of, and just running toward it. I don't know. I think it's an incredible movie.
Oh, it's cool. I'll have to check it out. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, and there is another movie, Sound of Freedom.
I just saw that one last weekend, yeah.
So you dealt with people that were trafficked, right?
I worked with some of them to help kind of share some of these concepts with them, yeah.
How did you help them? What was the biggest thing that they needed help with?
I think the biggest thing whenever I work with people in sort of the darkest corners of the globe, whether it be former child soldiers or them, is helping them see they're not a victim.
Wait a minute, child soldiers?
I've worked with former child soldiers in West Africa. Like I worked with this one guy who he saw his family being hacked to death with a machete, saw people being raped to death around him, forced to be a child soldier at a young age. Horrific. I mean,
what's the age of a child soldier? How young are they?
Sometimes under 10. I forget what age he was forced into this, but a few of them, it was in Liberia and West Africa, had gone out there to do some humanitarian work. And I mean, they've seen the darkest of human evil as children. It's absolutely horrific what they've endured. And the biggest thing when you talk to them is seeing that you're not a victim. Because what happens is the world feeds into this paradigm that I've gone through the shit, so woe is me. I'm a victim, right? Like, poor me. And obviously nobody would want somebody to, especially a child, but let alone anybody, to experience the hell that they've experienced. But now that they've experienced it, what I kind of help them reframe is kind of what we were talking about, is that you cannot really know the light unless you've been in the dark. And these people have seen some of the darkest of the human condition. As a result, they have greater access to light than most of us do. You know, and when they simply start to open the door to see that possibility, it expands their potential. Like someone who's endured that much hell on earth, when channeled, they have more resilience, more strength, more courage. I mean, these people were teaching me more than, I mean, they had more courage than I could ever hope to have in my life. These young girls, these guys who experienced hell on earth as child soldiers, they've endured all that and come out the other side more than most of us can fathom in terms of just battling the human evil that they've experienced. And as a result, they can access more light, more strength, more courage, more power. Because you cannot really know your power without pain.
Do you think they're happier regardless of the trauma?
I wouldn't say they're happier, because inevitably it leaves a little bit of a scar. They certainly can be. Like, they certainly can access greater heights as a result.
Greater courage, greater love, greater appreciation. Well, the thread that I'm hearing through this whole conversation is how much gratitude you have and appreciation toward life.
Absolutely. I mean, to this day, when I take a hot shower, I'm like, this is amazing because I know it's gone. I sit outside in the night sky and I look at the stars, because in Antarctica, there are no stars. There's no sunsets. There's no sunrises. So when you play on the edges, it just amplifies the gift of everything in the human experience.
So what do you think playing on the edges can look like for the average person that is not as extreme as you are?
Find a way to go into a place of pain. You could do a cold tub, for crying out loud, like do a long fast. When you do a long fast and you eat food after that, that food will taste divine. You know, do something that's going to push you. And like one of the ways I approach it is, in life, there's all these dualities, as we were talking about, right? Life and death, masculine, feminine, pain, pleasure, control, surrender, ego, humility. So yeah, there's a series of these dualities. And a way to approach it, to play on the edge, is find a duality causing you friction and go play on the other edge of it. So I'll give you another example. Like, I remember going for a run once, and I saw this sign that said 5K fun run. And I had visceral disgust at the idea of running for fun. Like, it wasn't even a conscious choice. I was like, that's stupid. You don't run for fun. You should only suffer. Now, that wasn't healthy. That wasn't a good way to approach it. And so I realized I was attracting suffering into my life in all ways. So if you look at the duality of suffering and play, and again, don't get caught up in the semantics of it. Use whatever words you want. I realized that I was so good on the suffering realm, but I really struggled in the realm of play. Like I would, even if I go to retreat, if people ever were like dancing or doing light things, I would have nothing to do with that. I'd rather go do burpees in the corner and suffer, right? Now that wasn't healthy because I was bringing suffering to all edge. So I went and played on the other edge.
I would be with the people that are dancing.
Most people would. But see, like my challenge was no longer suffering because I actually thrived in the physical suffering, but I was struggling with play. I was struggling with fun. So I started consciously entering that realm. I would do more light things. Like I would go for runs without measuring the distance. I would do the dancing in these retreats. I would do the light things, started listening to fun music, watching funny things. So by playing on that edge, I now have opened new doors and expanded my experience of life, expanded my range of life, but I've also given myself new tools to access when I do suffer. So I'm always going to be clearly with my lifestyle, clearly someone who always leans towards the edge of suffering, if you look at this particular scale. But now I can bring play to my suffering. So that's one duality. Even when I went into the darkness, if you look at the duality of control and surrender, I'm a giant control freak. Many entrepreneurs are, right? Like I'll control my world. It's my fate is in my hands. So I was playing with surrender. Okay, I'm good at control. Let me play with surrender. I'm going to surrender to the darkness to see what is revealed to me, and actually consciously just embracing the mysticism of the human experience, embracing the mysticism of life. So at any point in life, I'm always working on one duality that's causing me friction. And how do you find what that is? Self-awareness. Choose one. There's no right one. Let's look at the duality of ego and humility. But here's the thing. If you want to be great, you have to own your greatness. So I'm not saying walk around, be egotistical and arrogant, but own that part and then also own humility. Like the best athletes in the world are a great example of this. If you listen to Kobe Bryant, for example, one of the legends, right, greatest in the world, you'd hear some of his interviews and he sounds egotistical, but he just knows he's a badass and he's the greatest. But if you really listen to him, he also has tremendous humility to be a learner. The best athletes in the world are the perfect example of ego and humility coexisting. They know how badass they are, but they also have the humility to be a learner and to know where their gaps are. That's the key. Like all of life's dualities, they can coexist as one. And that's really the essence of Fearvana is fear is not the antithesis of nirvana. Fear is an access point to it. And fear and nirvana can coexist as one.
I love that. So basically you stretch yourself wherever you are. You just step out of your comfort zone, whatever it is for you, mentally, physically.
Exactly. And for some people, like it was for me, the outside the comfort zone was not the hard thing. It was actually the playful thing, right? So it sounds weird, but most people would be more struggling with burpees. But at that point in my life, that's where I need to go, was doing the light thing, the dancing, the hula hoops, whatever it may be, That was my discomfort.
Yeah, I'm going to finish this and go do burpees.
Awesome. I hope you suffered beautifully.
Before we say goodbye for now, what are your 3 top tips to live in a stellar life?
Master that space between stimulus and response. So the 2 darts will be number 1. Stop chasing happiness. Chase a worthy struggle. What is your worthy struggle? Chase that. And then as you do that, keep training yourself to smile in the face of suffering. Like that doesn't happen by listening to a podcast or reading a book. That can provide a spark, but the only way you develop that mastery is you have to enter the arena. You have to step into the arena. Just remember this, I'll leave you with this final line. Belief is built on the battlefield. One of my big beefs with the personal development realm is this overwhelming focus on overcoming limiting beliefs, quote unquote. You don't need to believe in yourself to take action. You just need to step into the arena and go to war. And belief will be built from there. Go to war with yourself. And as you build that belief on the battlefield, you'll be able to keep stepping up, keep pursuing the next worthy struggle, keep pursuing that evolving up leveling, and happiness will be the side effect that results from that journey. The stellar life will be the side effect that results from pursuing your worthy struggle.
Yes, there is so much to everything you just said, but that's for another conversation. So where can people find you and get your book, do your joint retreats with you? How does it work? I don't know.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. That's the primary platform I use, Fearvana, Fearvana, fearvana.com. The book is available on Amazon, Kindle, Audible, Fearvana. And then we also currently have a crowdfunding campaign for the Antarctic crossing. Any support there, it's greatly appreciated at greatsoulcrossing.com. That's great, SOUL, soulcrossing.com. Any one of those places, you can find me in the work that I do.
Actually, this was fascinating and exciting, and I think my heart was racing more than once during our conversation. Thank you for sharing this. Thank you for everything that you do in the world, and thank you for taking yourself to those edges so we can learn from it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thank you, listeners. Remember to master the space between stimulus and response. Chase your worthy struggle and smile in the face of suffering. And have a stellar life. This is Orion. Till next time.